This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets.
Oil prices were little changed on Tuesday for a second straight day as uncertainty about the pace of potential U.S. interest rate cuts and the impact on fuel demand offset worries about Middle East tensions that could disrupt supply. Brent futures edged 1 cent lower, $81.99 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate, WTI, crude rose 1 cent to $76.93 a barrel. Oil prices were near flat in Monday's trade as well, after gaining 6% last week. The conflict in the Middle East has kept prices elevated.
U.S. oil output from top shale producing regions will rise in March to its highest in 4 months, the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA, said on Monday in its monthly drilling productivity report. Production from the top basins will rise by nearly 20,000 barrels per day, BPD, to 9.7 million barrels of oil per day, its highest since December, the EIA said. Oil output in the Permian Basin, the largest U.S. shale field spread across West Texas and New Mexico, was due to rise by about 14,000 barrels of oil per day to 6.1 million barrels of oil per day, the second highest monthly output on record after November, the EIA said.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
Oil and gas companies and environmental groups on Monday filed dueling legal challenges to the Biden administration's 5-year plan to offer drilling leases in the Gulf of Mexico. The petitions to a U.S. appeals court come 4 months after the Interior Department unveiled a congressionally mandated plan for offshore leasing that included just 3 sales, the lowest since the government began publishing the schedules in 1980. The American Petroleum Institute, an oil and gas trade group, said it was challenging the policy because it would leave Americans at risk of relying on foreign energy sources.
Iraq is committed to OPEC decisions, and after its second voluntary cut announced in December, it is also committed to producing no more than 4 million barrels per day, BPD, Oil Minister Hayyan Abdel Ghani told reporters on Monday. Iraq's current crude oil exports range between 3.35 million and 3.4 million barrels of oil per day, he added. The oil minister said talks with international oil companies operating in Iraqi Kurdistan are making progress towards resolving a dispute which has halted Iraq's northern oil exports. Next, we have the top news in metal markets. Copper prices were little changed on Tuesday as the Chinese Lunar New Year holiday weighed on sentiment and traders awaited U.S. inflation data for cues on the Federal Reserve's interest rate cuts. 3-month copper on the London Metal Exchange was up 0.7% at $8,291.50 a metric ton by 0333 GMT. The market expects the U.S. Consumer Price Index, CPI, for January, due to be released later in the day, to give the Fed further confidence that inflation is slowing towards its 2% target. The share of available aluminium stocks of Russian origin in warehouses approved by the London Metal Exchange, LME, remained steady at 90% in January, LME data showed on Monday. As part of wider sanctions against Moscow over its war in Ukraine, Britain restricted physical delivery of Russian-made base metals from December 15 for UK entities and individuals. The LME last month said that Russian metal continued to flow through LME-registered warehouses. The amount of Russian primary aluminium stocks on LME warrant fell to 286,750 metric tons in January from 338,375 in December, the data showed. We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector.
Farmers in southern Ukraine have started spring grain sowing, planting the first hectares of spring barley, producers said over the weekend. Farmers in the southern Odessa, Mykolaiv and Kherson regions traditionally start sowing in the second half of February if weather conditions are favorable. The weather has made it possible to start work in the field. The sowing of flax, coriander and spring barley is now underway, the Mykolaiv-based Southern Agrarian and Export Company said in a statement. That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.